Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. I'm Robert Winfree. I'm your host for this show. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. On the agenda this evening should be fairly quick. Last night, UFC on ESPN Plus 63 / UFC on ESPN 33 / UFC Columbus. It was hilarious looking at Twitter and seeing how many people couldn't spell Columbus, Ohio. Yeah, guys. C-O-L-U-M, not C-O-L-O. C-O-L-O is how you spell Colombia, the South American country. Columbus, Ohio is not spelled that way. But, expecting people to have a decent grasp of both spelling and geography seems to be a tall ask these days. At least on Twitter. Let me walk that back. At least on Twitter. It's a pretty tall ask. So we'll be reviewing that. Highs and lows. I think the stuff that we expected to potentially be good mostly delivered. So we'll go over that. And then, well, everybody's getting arrested. Yeah, my three big news items for the week are just, Masvidal, McGregor, and a little Chael Sonnen, I guess. So, yeah, that's what we're doing. All right. Before we get going, I want to thank you all again very much for your support of the show. Any like, comment, subscription, any sharing you can do, star rating, written reviews, anything and everything that you all can do to help promote the show means the world to me. So thank you very much. Again, it means a lot. All right, let's jump in then. Don't need to keep the preamble too lengthy. UFC on ESPN Plus 63. Main event, Curtis Blaydes defeats Chris Daukaus via TKO punches at 17 seconds of the second. I knew it was fast. I forgot exactly how fast. It's been floated before that Daukaus might want to consider a move to light heavyweight. And I think there's a degree of merit to that thought. I'm not calling for it necessarily, but I don't know the guy, so I don't know his. He might have tried it before and it just doesn't work. There's some guys who are just like that. That you start cutting weight and they can just never really get down safely, or it costs them too much, or what have you. Or he just doesn't want to, which is just as valid a reason. I'm just saying, if he hasn't at least given it some pretty serious consideration, I think he's doing himself a disservice. First round went to Blaydes. Daukaus was having success. He has fast hands. Unfortunately, he doesn't seem to didn't here at least, have the power necessary to really kind of back Blaydes up. And again, this was not a terribly engaging fight. Second round, they both throw right hands at the same time. Blaydes lands a little bit better, and he's just a little bit off the center line. He still gets hit. They hit each other. But Blaydes timed it pretty well. It needs to be mentioned. Daukaus had kind of thrown out a jab. Not much intention of landing it, just kind of get a reaction, throw the right hand behind it. And Daukaus he followed it back with his right, and Blaydes did, and Daukaus didn't quite bring it back all the way up to block his head. I don't know that it would have mattered that much given how their bodies had shifted, but it's a note. Daukaus goes down, Blaydes jumps on him. Needed win for Blaydes. Not just in the sense that he got a win, but I've said this before about Blaydes, and on occasion when it's been true. I think he's been a bit unfairly maligned as just a wrestler. That said, it's clearly a skill set that he uses most of the time. This was the first time in his entire UFC career that he did not attempt a single takedown in a fight. Did not attempt one in this fight, so. He said he wanted a fight with Gon after this. Might have been trying to set up the UFC. Might have been trying to set up him and Stipe Miocic. I think either of those are perfectly acceptable fights. Him and Gon I think it's a big, interesting fight for both men. We haven't seen Gon have to deal with a legitimate wrestler. And Ngannou had some success against him, but I think Ngannou's success was not quite as Uh, it wasn't quite as dominant as I expected it would be if he was able to get takedowns. Uh, and also, for the record, if you'll recall, I scored that fight for Gon between Gon and Ngannou. But it will be a big test of his wrestling if he's willing and able to shore up some of those holes that Ngannou was able to exploit. It's a pretty big fight for Blaydes. Uh, he's not had the best time when he's had to deal with longer guys who are good about maintaining and measuring distance. For the most part, he's overcome them, and you need to be kind of a big power puncher to really get him out of there. But it would be a big test for both guys in the sense that it would ask questions that both of them would need to answer going forward. So that said, again, if they do Stipe, I'm not going to complain about it. There's still a big question mark over the top of the heavyweight division. I mean, you've got Tuivasa, who just kind of exploded on the scene. You've got Tom Aspinall rising. You've got Gon still near the top. Stipe, we don't quite know. He's been out of action for over a year. He was present at the card last night, but in the crowd, he didn't fight or anything. So he's still something of a question mark. We don't know what's up with John Jones. At this point, I wouldn't make any plans around him personally, but it needs to be acknowledged. And there's still the giant question mark surrounding Francis Ngannou's future. So we really don't know much of anything at the moment. There's a lot of ways this could shake out. There's a lot of permutations, most of which could be very legitimate. If they did, Blaydes and Gon for another interim title now that Ngannou's recovering from his knee surgery. Is anyone really going to complain about that? I mean, the interim title that Gon won, last year was a little bit BS. There was not a whole lot of call for that. This time around, between the injury and the contract uncertainty, I think this is when you should have an interim title. But, the UFC loves to devalue its titles. But there's also a real argument about whether or not they actually are devaluing them, since, they are, but no one really cares about stuff that's not the UFC anyway. I mean, I talk about some of the other stuff on occasion. In fact, I'll talk a little bit about the ONE event. His ONE championship had their ONE X, their 10th anniversary card. Go over some of the highlights that I saw, because I didn't watch the whole thing. I mean, I have other stuff to do with my time, and so on. But there were a few fights that I did make sure to look up, a few finishes, so I'll go over that very briefly. But most people, if you're listening to this show, you're pretty much you're some value of a hardcore MMA fan. And there are still people who don't refer to it as MMA. There are still people who refer to this as Ultimate Fighting. If you want an example of still just how kind of monolithic the UFC is as an entity in the MMA space. So the question just kind of ultimately becomes, are they really devaluing their titles when the floor on how valuable a UFC belt is clearly quite high? You can argue where the ceiling is, I think. That might not be as high for the most part as people think it is, but if you want to, what's the least valuable UFC title? I mean, you can argue certain champions are in rougher spots, but if we're talking what's the least valuable title, probably women's featherweight, because there's no division. But even that, is there much argument that you could argue this point if you're a hardcore fan, but as a general rule, if you were the interim UFC women's featherweight champion, anyone who knows what's going on there is going to laugh at that. But as a general rule, one, they're going to get paid like a full champion. And two, is it really that outside the realm of possibility that they're probably the second best women's featherweight fighter in the world? That's kind of the point. So, I don't know. But this would be a time when an interim title would be warranted, in my opinion. So I don't know exactly what's coming up next for that, but Blaydes versus Gon, or Blaydes versus Miocic are two very, very realistic fights to make. Uh, Heavyweight seems to finally be getting a little bit of turnover in some respects. It's a shame we've got the logjam that we do, but between the UFC's decision making and the unfortunate injury to Francis, like, what else are you gonna do? Sometimes these things just happen, and you can look back at behaviors and decisions and whatnot and point to what kind of made them, but this is not really this is not anything all that far outside the history of combat sports. So, as for Daukaus, I don't know. A step back in competition at a bare minimum. Guys should be probably fighting guys somewhere between like 10 and 15, or potentially even I don't think you need to drop him all the way back to unranked, but certainly lower top 15. Um, and as mentioned before, a serious contemplation about at least a fight at light heavyweight. I don't know how well that'll go. I don't know if he can even realistically make that as part of a weight cut, but he should seriously consider it. Maybe he still stays at heavyweight, but that should be something he considers. That was your main event. Uh, Not bad for as long as it lasted. All right, co-main event. Alexa Grasso defeats Joanne Wood via submission, rear naked choke. This is the first submission win on Alexa Grasso's resume. 357 of the first. They were going at it a little bit. Somewhat predictably, anything that took place in pure boxing range seemed to favor Grasso just a hair. When they all the way tied up, Joanne Wood's got some really good knees in the clinch. She's willing to throw elbows. We'll talk about elbows more in our next fight. Because, ooh, doggy. But Joanne tried a spinning attack, got taken down off of it. Grasso jumped on her back, got the choke. Yeah, I was watching Grasso when she was on the come up in Invicta, so I've been watching her for a bit, and she's good. Um, she might get the next title shot off of this. Now, that might seem a little bit crazy if we consider the rankings. Now, let me go over these real fast because these have not been updated after last night's event, but it can still be somewhat informative, and I can make reasonable guesses. Grasso was 9 coming into this. Wood was 7. This is probably going to also factor in Jennifer Maia, who was ranked 4th, lost to Manon Fior, who was 13. So a little bit of guesswork tells me Grasso is probably going to jump up to near top 5. And Fior is going to skyrocket. So yeah, we're gonna get a little bit of turnover there, thankfully. Um, Now, I have to talk a little bit about Fior because she was the other flyweight that fought on this card. She called out Caitlin Chukagian, which is a reasonable call out. We haven't seen the full breadth of what Fior has to offer, so another fight is a bit more warranted. Grasso's a bit more of a finished product, which is not to say she's stuck in the mud or anything, but she's been at this point long enough that I'm not sure how much more development of her skills is going to come along if we push off bigger fights. And there's a time when even fighters who look like they've got the rocket strapped to their back and whatnot, it still can be valuable if they're young enough and still in the developmental process to slow roll them. And I think Fior might be a little bit more in that camp, whereas at this point, Grasso, not quite as much. I mean, if we look at the top of women's flyweight, you've got, the destroyer of worlds up there, Valentina Shevchenko. Well, the destroyer of flyweight, at least. And if you look at the top contenders, her next title challenger is Taila Santos, which I favor Shevchenko pretty handily there because I favor her over everyone in that division. But I think people are going to sleep on Santos a little bit too much. If you look at everyone above her, number 1 is Jessica Andrade, Shevchenko stopped her. 2 is Caitlin Chukagian, stopped her. 3 is Lauren Murphy, stopped her. 4 is Jennifer Maia, beat her. 5 is Santos, then Viviane Araújo, Joanne Wood, Andrea Lee, then Grasso. So, but those top 4, Shevchenko has beaten decisively. Even the Maia fight that went the distance, that was not a close fight. I've said this before, everyone lost their minds because Maia got a takedown and held top position for a round. And then lost the other 4 rounds. Like, that's... So, you win 1 round, like, it's not nothing, but that doesn't make it a close fight. So, if Grasso jumps up enough, and it wouldn't be out of line to drop Murphy down. So Santos might wind up at like 3. Bump Grasso to you bump Grasso to 4, Fior to 5. That's a bit much, but I'm trying to guess how the rankings are going to go, and we all know the rankings are weird. Trying to understand them is that's a borderline Lovecraftian nightmare. But Grasso could be. It's not unreasonable to think that she might get the shot after Santos, assuming Shevchenko retains. And that's the assumption I'm going to operate under, with the caveat, of course, that craziness happens. You can only win for so long before sometime you have something wrong and have one bad night, and the other girl has the fight of their life. It happens. But I don't think it's unfair to kind of, at this point, predict another Shevchenko win. Without being, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Taila Santos, of course. So Grasso might get a title shot off of this. Might have to fight one more time anyway, depending on how the timing pans out, but she also could be next. That division is rapidly... There's a few people who are coming up now. You've got Fiore, you've got the aforementioned Viviane Araújo, you've got Grasso, you've got some people who are making some headway, but that's a division that desperately needs a bit of turnover, and Shevchenko has just walloped so much of that division. I don't know what's next for Wood. She's been up and down, but she's never quite seemed to... this is 3 in a row. I thought she won the Murphy fight. This was June of 2021 at UFC 263. I scored that fight for her. I thought she got screwed by the judges. Then Santos and Grasso both tapped her out in the first round. That's a bit more troubling. I also thought she lost the Andrea Lee fight at 242. I don't know if she wants to just kind of keep hanging on. But she needs to figure some things out. This 3 in a row is never a good spot. It's worse when you're starting to lose faster. Santos beat her at 449 of 1. Grasso now 357. If we go back a little bit, Jennifer Maia, when Maia beat her, was 429 of 1. There's some things she's got to sort out. Assuming she can. I am not calling for her to retire, but she is 35. And she's been fighting. Her kickboxing career started in like 05-ish. I want to say 05. Yeah, I'm gonna go with that for the moment. Some of these are not properly reported or whatnot, so early 2000s. Let's go with that. And her MMA career started in 2012. So she's been at this for closer to 20 years than not. That gets you down, man. That bill always comes due. So I don't know. I imagine she'll keep trying, but I think the end of the road is closer for her than you might think. Let's see. Next up, this fight. Brian Barberena defeats Matt Brown via split decision, 29-28. So 2 for Barberena, 1 for Brown. great fight. This was everything you thought it would be. When you put these two just hard-nosed, hard scrabble, knees and elbows, all action guys in front of each other. This was great. Brown takes the first round, some smart takedowns, some good top control, both men landing punches. Second round was kind of the swing round, I think. Barberena comes out a bit more on top. He's able to land the more damaging blows, not quite taken down as much. Third round, back and forth, both men landing punches and elbows and knees and kicks and everything else. Both men get hurt. Barberena closes stronger, though. He closes with this really big flurry. Enough to get the split decision. Crowd booed. Matt Brown's the hometown boy. He's from Columbus, Ohio. I know they're not going to do this, but I'm going to echo a sentiment that I saw. I really wish, if you want to boo the decision, fine. But when the fighter starts talking, give them a chance to say their piece. They have no say over the judging. All right, and I agreed with the judging in this case, but even if you didn't, that's not on the fighters. Don't be jerks. If they start antagonizing or saying stupid stuff, fine, boo them. But you really should give the fighters a chance to know that, especially in a close fight like this, that's an all-action kind of 3-round war. There's no reason to boo that guy. None whatsoever. If you didn't see this fight, look it up. This was great. This was a great fight. Some really, really nice foot sweeps from Brown that he was hitting in the first and second round. Wish more people would use those. They're really valuable tools. Teddy Atlas on Twitter compared this to Gotti Ward, but just with elbows and knees and whatnot. Not quite sure I'd go that far personally, but the sentiment of what he's expressing there is, I do agree with. Again, this was a great fight. Look it up. Absolutely worth your time to watch. This was apparently the last fight on Bryan Barberena's contract, and he said, I think Brown was kind of near the end of his contract too. Before I go in a little bit further, just to Matt Brown, 41 years old, been doing this forever. I mean, when I say forever, he started, his professional debut was in 2005. He's been with the UFC since 2008. He's part of the 7th season of The Ultimate Fighter, when that show still arguably had a degree of credibility. I mean, he's been up and down since then. He had a nice long run at one point with some really good finishes in it. I mean, him from 2012 to 2014, that was a stretch of magic. I mean, just wonderful stuff. And it's not like he's had bad fights since. If you didn't see his fight with Donald Cerrone from UFC 206, that's a really good fight. His brutal knockout of Diego Sanchez, of course. I mean, there's a lot. But this guy's been through the wood chipper, man. And I give him all the credit in the world for still going out there and still being this much of not only a good fighter in a technical sense, but this competitive. Like the fight still exists in him. The dog is still there, and that not a lot of people have that at 41. That's one of those things that does fade, and he's still got it. So God bless him, man. Again, Barberena mentioned this in the last fight on his contract, and if the UFC doesn't re-sign him, he's not going to try and fight somewhere else. He's just going to happily retire. Appreciate his honesty. I imagine the UFC will, after this fight, try to get him another deal, but they've done weirder stuff in the past, so who knows. This was your fight of the night. Deservedly so. Great fight. Another great fight. Kai Kara-France defeated Oscar Askarov via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board. Did not agree with this one. First round, Askarov. Kara-France is trying with the striking, but he's not quite getting a whole lot of it. Gets taken down, gets his back taken. Second round, Askarov can't really get the takedown, and Carl France lands some good punches. Seems to wobble him at one point, so one apiece going into the third. Third round's a little bit dicier. They kind of trade for a bit. Askarov gets a clinch against the fence and jumps to the back. I mean, he had this used the fence, by which I mean he kind of got around towards the back in the clinch. Put one leg in as a hook, put the other on the fence, and then use that to kind of push him and Kara France away from the cage so he could get room for the hook in. It's a really nice trick. And perfectly legal. You can't grab the fence, but you can push off of it. So using it in that respect, Jacare Souza used to do something similar to that. When he wanted to get someone's back from that kind of position, he'd push off the fence with one of his legs. Really neat trick. So he gets the back, can't find a legitimate kind of choke attempt or whatnot. Carl France defends, is able to get him off, and spends the rest of the round pushing forward. They both land some more punches. Carl France is definitely the better striker. Askarov is, he's not out of it, but you could see where the skill discrepancies were in both guys. So ultimately, I thought Askarov should have won the third, but it's also one of those things that I'm not up in arms over. The third round was more than competitive enough to go either way. It's a bit of a shame that... Here's the only thing I'm going to say about this. I understand that there was a time when positions were rated too heavily in MMA scoring. I think we might have gone too... I think the pendulum might have overcorrected at this point. It seems like a lot of judges don't score back takes anymore. Which I mean legitimate back takes. Which is kind of a shame. I mean, certain takedowns and whatnot maybe shouldn't be warranted as highly as they used to be. I get that. I've advocated for that. But taking the back is kind of the ultimate position. It is the best position from which to operate if we're talking about a fight. If I'm behind you, there's not a lot you can do to me. So I do think that's a position that needs to be scored a bit more effectively than it is, but somewhat in the same vein, Carl France's defense from that spot was good enough to severely limit Askarov's ability to either threaten with submissions or inflict a lot of damage, and that does also need to be noted. I think if, in that third round in particular, if Askarov had been able to mount some kind of sustained attack from there, it might have swung things in his favor, but so I think 29-28 for either man is a perfectly acceptable scorecard. I might disagree, but I don't think it's outrageous. Carl France said he wants the next title shot. Davison Figueiredo, or his manager, I don't know who, but someone at least posting on his behalf on social media said that he wants to fight Carl France next and kind of told Brandon Moreno to get back in line. I don't know if that's a negotiation tactic related to the potential fourth fight between Figueiredo and Moreno, or what, but that's at least floating out there in the ether. I tend to think we're going to get the fourth fight between Moreno and Figueiredo. We've never had, in the UFC, we have never had 4 fights between 2 guys. So, and this seems like as good a time as any to break that particular milestone, I guess. I mean, they are 1-1-1 after 3 fights, so. And I think the timing might more favor that. I don't know who's dealing with what behind the scenes, but given when Figueiredo and Moreno fought relative to when this fight took place and how things might line up in the future, I tend to think we're probably going to get Moreno and Figueiredo, and then Carl France will either be on standby or just get the next shot after that, so. Sucks for Askarov, but hopefully he can take some of the lessons from this and maybe get focus a little bit more on finding effective strikes in ways that he hadn't before, or prioritize when it comes to some of his grappling, which is still exceptional. That guy's a monster. when it comes to the wrestling, but he's got to start finding ways to prioritize finding damage or threatening at this level instead of kind of the control that he's used to, because and this happens with guys when they reach a certain level. At a lower level, you're able to capitalize on scrambles, or other guys get frustrated with your control and they leave openings that just don't happen at higher levels. So I still think very highly of Askarov, and I hope he rebounds from this. Let's see. Next up, welterweight. Neil Magny defeated Max Griffin via split decision, again 29-28. Good first round for Griffin. He sat Magny down at one point. Beautiful right hand as he was stepping back. He dropped Magny. Magny rebounded. I think, again, 29-28 is defensible for either man. You've got... This comes down to round two. Because round one, clearly Griffin. He hurt Magny and then dropped him. Round three was all Magny with his clinch work, his wrestlings, that kind of stuff. Round two is kind of the swing round here. And I think I'm pretty sure I scored it for Magny. So I can see the argument for Griffin, but... Magny, more or less your deserving winner here. Neil Magny just keeps chugging along. I tend to think this is about where he stays. I think at this point we've seen basically the best of him. He's talented, and if you're not really good, he will chew you up. At the same time, whenever he's stepped up to someone who's really good, those haven't usually been the closest fights. He's on a good run right now. Yeah, he's 5-1 in his last 6, but Michael Chiesa beat him pretty thoroughly over 5 rounds. Before that, Ponzinibbio stopped him. Before that, Rafael dos Anjos beat him. Before that, Lorenz Larkin chewed him up. The point being, at any time when he's really been the guy to step up instead of the person being stepped up against, it tends to be a bit of a struggle. He's got some good wins. I certainly don't mean to pretend otherwise. I thought he looked really good when he beat Kelvin Gastelum back in 2015. His win over Robbie Lawler was impressive. So I'm not saying that he's only good as some guy who beats scrubs. Like I said, you've got to be good. He's beaten Li Jing Liang, who was on a pretty good run. He's beaten Anthony Rocco Martin, who was on a good run. Again, if you are not either ready to take that step up to the very top or already there, he will make your life miserable. I kind of think we've found his ceiling. And kicking off the main card, Mark Jacasey defeated Vyacheslav Borshev via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. Jacasey just out-wrestled Borshev for all 3 rounds. Not a whole lot to it. Prelim, Sarah McMahon defeated Carol Hossa via unanimous decision, 29-28. McMahon won the first 2 rounds with wrestling, because she's a very, very good wrestler. Third round, she got a takedown. They fought back up, and Hossa hit a really nice kind of an overhook hip throw and got on top. And McMahon off of her back, she's not the most urgent about getting up. I don't know if this is a physical thing or a mental thing. She's also not great with her guards. It's not that hard to posture up on her. She gave away the third round. Not enough for a 10-8, not even close to enough for a 10-8. I certainly don't mean to imply otherwise. But she kind of was just willing to throw that one away. I won the first 2 rounds. I'm not worried about being finished at the moment, so sure, I'll ice it. Which, that's not going to endear you to a lot of people, but I very rarely blame fighters for that, assuming they're not, again, one, just completely avoiding the fight, and this is kind of the caveat for me. If your plan is to win the first 2 rounds and then spend the third just assiduously avoiding anything, that rubs me the wrong way. If you've won the first 2 rounds and in the course of the third round you find yourself in a disadvantageous position, but one where you can game the clock a little bit, still lose the round, but limit damage, limit anything like that, and just, all right, fine, I'm not going to take any stupid risks that might get me finished, but you've still been pursuing the fight. I understand that, and under those circumstances, I'm just more forgiving of it. McMahon needed the win in a pretty big way. Non-trivial setback for Hossa. She'll have to redo and kind of retool some things. Some of what she ran up against here was just maybe the best pure wrestler in women's MMA, certainly in the UFC. McMahon's an Olympic silver medalist. Like, that woman can wrestle. Let's see. Bantamweight. Chris Gutierrez defeated Dana Batgary via TKO, spinning back fist and then punches and elbows. 2:34 of the second. This was a good fight. Gutierrez was throwing the calf kicks early. I think the big thing that hurt Dana here, he was headhunting way too much. He did a pretty decent job of backing Gutierrez to the fence, but when he got there, instead of hitting the body or kicking the trailing leg or whatnot, he was going for the head, and that just seemed like a tactical error. His footwork also fell down a little bit as the fight wore on, and he started following a bit more than cutting off, and that's kind of what Gutierrez used. In the first round, near the end of it, Gutierrez tries a spinning attack, gets taken down, and kind of pounded on for the last 20-ish seconds. Second round, we see that same spin. This time it works. He kind of baits Dana into coming a bit too close, spinning back fist, drops him, jumps on top. Solid win from Gutierrez. I'm still a believer in Dana. He's a really good fighter, but some tactical, real-time decision-making issues here that I hope he sorts out because, like I said, he's really good. This was a good fight. Middleweight, Aliskhab Kirzriev, excuse me. Yeah, Aliskhab Kirzriev defeated Denis Tululin via technical submission, rear naked choke, 158 of the second. Credit to Tululin here a little bit. He took this fight on relatively short notice. I think about a month. And he came to fight. He was the biggest underdog on the card. I think Khizriev was like plus or minus 1250, like huge. Biggest favorite on the card was Khizriev. And he came to fight. Both men landed some body kicks. Just the wrestling wound up being a bit too much. Nice back take from Khizriev, got the choke. I have a hard time kind of really judging someone off of this, especially because Khizriev said he's going to try to cut down to welterweight rather. Given his frame, I think that's possible. He was really thick through the torso here. Now, it might still be a bridge too far for him weight cut wise. I do need to point that out. But I don't think he's wrong to consider it. And even if he comes back up to middleweight, his wrestling is something. So he's good performance from him. Women's flyweight, Manon Fior defeated Jennifer Maia via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. Maia, credit to Fior, who showed off a chin here. She got hit with like twice with head kicks from Maia and just ate them. I mean, she clearly didn't enjoy the experience of getting kicked in the head, but it didn't really deter her the way that you might think. She backed off and kind of regained herself, but regained herself fairly quickly and got back on offense. Fior's strong in the clinch. She's a big flyweight. There's still a little bit of a question about some of her grappling, but someone who's still developing like she is, that's understandable. And her striking it's pretty powerful, but I think she still leans a little bit too heavy into some of the gimmickry. She does a lot of lead leg kicks as she fights southpaw, a lot of side kicks to the leg and body, which are good tools. But commentary even brought this up. Like, it's a good tool for measuring or for keeping distance, but unless you time a side kick to the body really well, you're unlikely to hurt someone with them. Now, this is not true of the average person, right? And I know this because I have both side-kicked people and been kicked. And obviously I'm not a professional fighter, so I'm not physically hardened and used to it kind of the way they are, which is one of the big determining factors. Again, if I were to kick the average person really hard with a side kick, doesn't feel good. And I'm not saying these felt great for Jennifer Maia, but absent really good timing and placement, they're probably not going to end a fight. They do score. They're not pleasant. But if you're looking for something that'll end a fight, you've got to time those really well. Now that can still be done, but I think there's just some of her weapons that need to be refined a little bit more. She was throwing hook kicks kind of occasionally in this fight, and getting hit with a hook kick is not a fun experience either. At the same time, if you're going to start prioritizing finishes and damaging people, when you get towards the higher end of the mixed martial arts spectrum, a lead leg hook kick is probably not going to do a tremendous amount of damage. If you can spin with it, you get a lot more velocity. If you're just lifting up the lead leg and throwing it, again, it's not great. And could someone who's good at that, Fiore's pretty good at them. I mean, Stephen Thompson immediately springs to mind as someone who's very, very dexterous with his lead leg. Could Stephen Thompson potentially knock me out with a lead leg hook kick? Yeah, probably. Is he going to knock out anyone he's fighting in the UFC with one of those? No. You do them to score points, keep your opponent off balance, and they have value. But they're not usually a finishing technique at this level. Again, at this level. You get enough of a skill disparity, and you can finish just about anything. So I think I would be curious to see her try and maybe refine and potentially prioritize more finishing, more higher percentage finish weapons. She's good about scoring. She's good about landing punches. She's good about angling. Physically strong. There's a lot that is very, very good, and there's a lot of reason to be very high on her potential. But I do tend to think I'd like to see a few more of the traditional weapons developed and used a bit more. Just as an observation. I mentioned this before. She called out Caitlin Chukagian. I'd be fine with that. And let's see. Flyweight. Matthews Nicolau defeated David Dvorak via unanimous decision, 29-28. Not a bad fight. This one took a bit to get going, but once it got there, the third round of this was really good. First round, not so much. Both men still very good fighters. Flyweight has a lot of talent. The UFC tends to bury a lot of their fighters in this kind of position, but there's some talent there. I'm curious to see how Dvorak rebounds from this setback. Dude's tough as nails. He got hit hard and dropped and just got up and kept on chugging, man. Nicolau's, he's been really good since coming back to the UFC. I think he's undefeated at flyweight. Double check that real fast. No. Let's see. No, sorry. No, his only losses are at flyweight. He has one from outside the UFC. Dustin Ortiz stopped him in the UFC. He took that got him bounced from the promotion, actually. He did a couple of bantamweight fights before coming back to the UFC at flyweight. Yeah, he's 3-0 since returning to the UFC. He was ranked before this. What was he ranked coming into this? Yeah, he was number 7 coming into this. So he's going to take a bump. Kai Kara-France is going to bump up. Askarov's going to drop down. Might be time. Nicolau and Askarov wouldn't be the worst thing. I mean, you've got other guys in that same spot who need fights. You got Alexandre Pantoja, you got Brandon Royval, you got Alex Perez. Like, you've got talented fighters up there. So him against any of those guys. He said he wants someone in the top 5 next. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. 100% agree with that. And kicking everything off, Luis Saldana defeated Bruno Souza via unanimous decision, 29-28. Not sure I completely agreed with that, but I wasn't going to get up in arms over it. I saw Jack Slack say this on Twitter, so I'm going to It amused me so much. I'm going to repeat it here. Souza, one of his Lyoto Machida is one of his trainers. He was in his corner actually. Slack said something to the effect of, "It's amusing that the Machida brothers have produced a bunch of fighters who stand like them and who move like them, but who only throw looping punches instead of straight punches." And once I saw that, once I saw it in that context, I can't unsee it. It's true. Machida very rarely threw looping punches. He's a very straight hitter. Uh, Souza, by contrast, pretty loopy. And it doesn't quite blend with the karate stance the way that part of that stance and part of what makes it effective is the ability to kind of spring close and then fire a very straight punch. When you start looping it, you're kind of half pregnant. You're not getting the same kind of power that you would if you were in a different stance that might benefit that kind of punch. So you're kind of doing two opposing things, and neither of them to their greatest effect. Saldana got a little bit tired down the stretch. That was pretty obvious. But ultimately, he just landed a bit more. Souza just got outworked. Got outstruck in rounds 1 and 3 in particular. I think Souza took the second. Um, Not a great fight, but not terrible. I don't think anything from this card is going on my worst of list. So your bonuses, I already mentioned. Fight of the night was Barberena and Brown. Well deserved. Kind of sucks for Kara France and Askarov because when that fight got cooking, that was a really good fight too. Performances, Curtis Blaydes and Chris Gutierrez. No issues with that. I mean, you only had a couple of finishes on this card. Not a lot of decisions. Um, so yeah, again, I'm not going to complain about the performance bonuses or whatnot here, other than to say that I think everyone who finishes should get a fat bonus. If you wanted to alleviate some of the complaints about fighter pay, if you bump everyone's base pay by 50 to 60%, this might be a little bit different at the top end. Like anyone you already pay flat, they're all still underpaid, but I'm talking about like if we're talking about the people who populate these kinds of cards, if you give them all a 50 to 60% pay increase, remove the show and win component, maybe going like a 75. I mean, I'm trying to think about how like you could do this. Because doubling everyone, like removing the show and win setup, and then just straight doubling everyone's base, the UFC makes a giant batch of money. Like I'm not suggest what I'm suggesting with that is certainly something they could afford to do purely looking at the numbers. I think where it struggles just a hair is how they have to explain it to the people who own them and whatnot. So I'm trying something a little bit more feasible rather than something that is purely possible. If you bump everyone's pay 60 to 75%, and remove the show and win component from it, but you throw in the caveat that everyone who gets a finish gets a bonus of X. I don't know, 30, call it 30 grand, hypothetically. And then you can still do the fight of the night and the performances. Your performance of the night bonus, you could do 50 instead of 30 or on top of it. I mean, ideally, since I'm here partially advocating for fighters, I'd say on top. But again, the UFC is very, very stingy, so they might not go for that. But something like that, I think. I don't know if they'll do it in anytime in the near future, but and let me be clear about something else around this. That's not going to solve the fighter pay problem. The fighter pay problem is so entrenched at this point that I'm just trying to come up with a situation that might be a bit more stable for fighters. And I think for some of those guys on smaller contracts, you could straight double. Anybody coming in on like 12 and 12, just pay them 24 grand a fight and say you get another 30K if you finish. That would incentivize. I tend to think that would incentivize the kind of action the UFC is trying to go for, with the entire structure of how they've structured their business. I tend to think that would be a little bit. That might be a bit more effective in terms of the end goal, and it would certainly get fighters paid more money. So I'm all for that. Anyway, that's enough about me. That's enough of my hypothetical spewing about how the UFC might be able to change their pay structure. They're not going to until they're forced to. I mean that's reality. UFC will not change their pay structure until forced to by a preponderance of fighters or some kind of legal action, be that legislative or judicial. There's not really another way around that. They've demonstrated that time and time again. All right. I mentioned I'd talk about 1X real fast, so let me bring up the ones I wanted to talk about. 1X. Okay. What did I see from this? Seohee Ham and Denise Zamboanga. I'm probably mispronouncing that. I mean, Seohee Ham is always good for a fun fight. Let's see. The knockout. I'm gonna butcher this gentleman's name, and I apologize. I'm just gonna call him Nong O. He's a Thai fighter, and some of their last names, until I hear it pronounced, I have no idea. I don't wish to try and butcher it. This was the one Muay Thai. Their MMA stuff is meh for the most part, but they have like some of the best, especially like lighter weight kickboxers and Muay Thai fighters in the world that will compete for them. It's really impressive. Nongo scored this beautiful uppercut over Felipe Lobo. Brutal thing. Even if all you want to do is look up the finish, It was good. Let's see. Did not have anything to say about that one. A couple of things from the grand finale, I suppose. They had this split up into 3 different parts. Superbon defeated Marat Grigorian. This was kickboxing. Superbon's he's on a pretty good run. Is he the one I'm thinking of? Because Folyang and Parr, that was something. I think it's Superbon I'm thinking of. Let me just. Yeah, if you look at just his last 3 fights in particular, all of these have come under the one banner. But he beat Sidichai, who I think was also on this card. Let's go with Sidichai. I'm not going to try to pronounce that guy's last name. I don't wish to insult him. He beat Giorgio Petrosian, and now he beat Grigorian here. And I forget who should be next for him. But that's a heck of a run if you follow, kind of kickboxing. He's on a good run, so credit to Superbon. Yeah, Edward Folyang defeated John Wayne Parr. This was a Muay Thai rules fight. Parr's a legend, man. If you didn't follow that guy, I mean, he's 45 years old. He's still out there fighting. If you didn't follow him or weren't aware of him when he was tearing things up in like the early 10s and whatnot, that dude was just. I mean, he's been fighting since when did he debut? Like 97 ish. Trying to get records out of some of the Thai. Some of the Muay Thai records are not always the most assiduously kept. So, but Parr's a legend, man, and he lost this fairly, but shout out to him for just still being out there, still being awesome. Yoshihiro Akiyama defeated Shinya Aoki. It was funny. It's always nice to occasionally have it to be reminded of what a horrible cheater Yoshihiro Akiyama was in Pride. What was his fight with Sakuraba, where he was just greasing himself up before the fight, or just slathering himself with lotion so that The other guy couldn't get, so the Sakuraba couldn't get a hold of him and keep it. But if you brand yourself, I saw on Twitter, I forget who said this, but it amused me. If you brand yourself a sexy and a cheater, then eventually they're only going to remember that you're sexy. um, and I'm never going to shed tears over Shinya Aoki getting abused, so. Adriano Moraes defeating Yu Yu Wakamatsu via guillotine choke in the third round. Little bit of some shady reffing here. Wakamatsu was doing well, and then the ref just got on him for fighting smart, basically. So he tried a double leg on a guy he should never have tried a double leg on, and Moraes guillotined him right away. Yeah, not a fan of the refereeing there, but Adriano Moraes is really good. He had that knockout over Demetrius Johnson last year. It was some nice use of knees. And he's 20-3 overall. He's certainly no one to trifle with. Speaking of Demetrius Johnson, he defeated Rodtang in a mixed rules fight. This was one round of Muay Thai followed by a round of MMA, and I can't remember if they were alternating for the 4 rounds or if it was Muay Thai, MMA, Muay Thai. I forget. One does whatever they want. First round, again, the Muay Thai segment, clearly to Rodtang. Some people have overblown how well Demetrius Johnson did in that portion. I'm going to say it like this. And so, I'm going to echo it's Grabaka Hitman, because I think he said it best. We've seen dedicated Muay Thai fighters do worse under Muay Thai rules against Rodtang than DJ did. And DJ still clearly lost that round. But it does deserve to be noted. Johnson lost that round, but did not do... In some cases, did better than people who are strict Muay Thai fighters who have fought Rodtang, because Rodtang's a tank. Second round, Demetrius Johnson just very quickly takes him down, works from there. He ultimately gets the back and chokes him out. It's what happens when you do these kind of things. Unless you're fighting Shinya Aoki. I'm never not going to be amused by that. Who was the guy he fought? I want to make sure I get his name right, because if you didn't see this, it was hilarious. He competed in a mixed rules fight. Oh, what was that guy's name? Yuichiro Nagashima. Special rules in 2010. First round, kickboxing, because that's what Nagashima's known for. And Aoki just acted like a complete jackass, throwing drop kicks. Because anytime they hit the ground, the ref stops and stands them up, because we're under kickboxing rules. So, drop kick, rolling thunder, just all this stupid stuff to stall the clock. Second round starts, he shoots for a double leg, gets kneed in the head and knocked out. It was the funniest thing ever. So again, unless you're Aoki in these kind of mixed rules matches, they tend to go this way, and the idiots, the number of people who came out of this and, well, this is what would happen if Rodtang ever got in a real fight. Like, buddy, you want to walk up to that guy on the street and try your chances, you go for it. That is your funeral. Rodtang is a beast. Johnson is kind of in the winding down his career phase a little bit, I think. Who could blame the guy? He's 35. He's not the oldest, but he's been fighting for a while. When did he debut? He had that long run in the UFC, which will grind anyone down anyway. But his professional career started in 2007. So, wouldn't shock me if he's starting to wind things down. Just throwing it out there. I'm certainly not advocating for it or anything, but it does seem a little bit like that's kind of the point in his career that he's at. So, but nice to see him get a win, and I like DJ. Your main event for this, Angela Lee defeated Stomp Fairtex. I want to give Angela Lee credit here. Look, she gets memed a lot because one goes out of their way to make sure that she wins. They do stuff with scoring, or they'll have, we had the champion, the executive committee reviewed or whatnot. Like there's a lot of crap like that. But here she came back after a really long layoff. I mean, I think she had a kid, right? Yeah, after a pregnancy leave. Her last fight was in 2019. And she kind of got smoked in the first round. Like she got hurt with body shots and and Fairtex was all over her. Credit to her, she gutted through it, forced things to the ground, got the choke in the second rather, excuse me. So for all the jokes about, Andrea Lee and whatnot, and Christian Lee is the other one that one just kind of bends over backwards to try and keep these people on top for the sake of their more home base audience. She gutted through some tough parts of this fight and absolutely earned that win. So want to give her a shout out there. I think that was it. As far as anything else I wanted to talk about. I mean, we had Burchelt stop. His fight was stopped between rounds, but yeah. I don't think you guys want to hear me go too deep into boxing events that you're probably not all that concerned with. All right. The rest of this should be fairly quick. So let's talk the law, I suppose. First up, this happened Monday, not too long after very shortly after I got done recording. So allegedly, I'm going to stress allegedly. Now, one of these people has been arrested and charged, so I'm only going to leave it at that because everything else is still alleged. Allegedly, Jorge Masvidal and I think a couple of other people jumped Colby Covington at a steakhouse in Miami. Covington is cooperating with the police and pressing charges. He had a tooth that was broken or chipped, and some damage to a watch he was wearing. Masvidal has at this point he's been arrested, he's been charged. I think he's out on bail at the moment. Now again, this still needs to be proven in a court. Masvidal has pled not guilty. Happy to let the legal system do its thing. I can't say I don't get this because that wouldn't quite be true, but to me this is just horrible decision making on the part of assuming Masvidal is in fact the perpetrator. So assuming that, and I have no evidence, so be clear about that. I have no evidence, I have no knowledge, I know what everyone else knows based on what I've read and seen. I mean, Masvidal started fighting in the backyards of Miami. I assume some of you at least remember this. Like when Kimbo Slice was kind of coming up and doing the videos put out on YouTube of backyard street fights and whatnot. Masvidal was one of those guys. You can find those fights still, believe it or not. And you go from that to an exceptional year a couple of years ago to making a lot of money. Not as much as you should because no one in the UFC does. But he makes a lot of money, certainly relative to me. And I'm going to assume relative to you, though I don't know your personal financial situation. To potentially throw it all away, I mean, he's charged with felonies here. Like, this could be serious. I I I mean, most cases plead out, statistically speaking. So, decent enough chance this will at some point in the future, but you went from, again, you main evented a pay-per-view that did quite well. You've had 2 title shots. You've made your money. If the point of making that life-changing money isn't to change your life, why are you doing it? Why are you still doing these things? Why are you... And look, I'm not asking anybody out there to feel bad for Colby Covington. But I don't really care what you say. You, with very few exceptions here in the United States, that does not give someone legal recourse to hit you, to jump you. Like, that's, again, there's a very, very few circumstances wherein, you know, speech like that is not is considered something that will where you can justify attacking someone based purely on what they say. It's very rare, given the breadth of what people can say, and especially here in the United States, where we have freedom of speech. And I'm not asking you to feel bad for Covington. I'm not shedding any tears over the guy. But this is one of those things that people don't understand the argument. People do the, well, you know, if you can't punch. Let me be clear about something. I'm going to draw a series of lines here. And I want you to understand that I am not accused. When I mention, unless I'm talking specifically about Colby Covington, I am not talking about Colby Covington. You start with something that, you know, is a bit like, I saw this was years ago when I think some neo-Nazi got attacked or got into a verbal confrontation and then got punched. And the sentiment on Twitter was, well, if you can't punch a Nazi, then, you know, who can you punch? And I don't think people really understand what they're saying when they try to make this argument. I'm not sympathetic to the cause of ethno-nationalism or white supremacy or any of that. I fundamentally reject it. But I'm not in favor of living in a world where you can be attacked physically for saying things. And that's where we are here. Colby Covington said something that Jorge Masvidal didn't like, and Masvidal then assaulted him at a restaurant. And look, I'm not okay with that. If we want to talk purely pragmatically, yeah, Covington's been agitating for a while. Statistically speaking, this is kind of bound to happen. By the same token, I don't care if you walk through the worst part of any city with your wallet out in your hand, waving it in the air, singing zippity doo dah. That does not mean it's okay for someone to mug you. And there's a fairly obvious next step to this that I'm not going to take because I'm not sure I can say it in the way that won't rile people up. So I'm going to leave it at that example. It does not matter what you do as long as what you do is legally protected. No one can do something illegal to you. It's not that complicated. And whenever you look at something like this, it's very easy to say, well, no one cares if you punch a neo-Nazi in the face. Their ideology is abhorrent. And it is. But it's not that hard to take that and then turn it. And this is the thing that people forget about any of these. This is why the rules exist. The rules don't exist to protect The rules have to exist in a way that protects the people you dislike as much as the people you do like. I've said things on podcasts that other people don't like. I know it. I've expressed displeasure at films that are widely beloved. Should I get punched in the face for that? Is that You might be saying, well, it's not the same as look, Colby said something insulting about Dustin Poirier and Poirier's family. I find that in bad taste, bare minimum. I would never say that. But I'm also not in favor of extrajudicial physical violence. That's all this is. I'm not asking you to feel bad for Colby Covington. Again, I am not shedding tears over the man. I am not losing sleep over the fact that he got attacked. But how do you want society to function? Do you want a society where people are free to say what they want or not? And if not, be very, very careful about who you think is in control of what you get to say, because it's not you, and it never will be. So we'll have to wait and let the legal system play out as far as that goes. Stupid decisions from Jorge Masvidal if guilty. Just you're making a lot of money. This was just baffling. I mean, just baffling. I've seen some people kind of posit the notion that the UFC might try to leverage this for another fight between Covington and Masvidal, and to be candid, I don't see that happening. It's not that the UFC would never use something like this to promote a fight. They have, and they will in the future. It's more that we've seen the fight. Who cares? I mean that in all sincerity. Oh, Masvidal jumped Covington at a restaurant. Okay. How's that going to change how a fight goes if they fought? We saw them fight for 25 minutes. We know how this goes. I don't see it happening. I don't see this being some kind of ploy from Masvidal to try and get another fight with Covington. I just think it was a series of bad decisions spurred by emotions that one would like to hope he'd have put behind him. Again, all of this assuming that he is in fact the guilty party. All right. Also in the news, in the legal side of things, Conor McGregor was briefly arrested and his car impounded for reckless driving in Ireland. There's a video of this you can find if you're so inclined, because there was a fan kind of by McGregor around when it happened, so you can decide for yourself as far as that goes. I don't even really know what to say about McGregor at this point. I mean, I suppose I should say this. This does seem like the minor of the infractions he has been accused of, and in some cases is acknowledged guilt. This does seem like relatively minor, but still, it just doesn't speak well to the overall career position that he's in. So, I don't know that anything else will come of that, but something to potentially keep an eye on. Lastly, on the legal side of things, Chael Sonnen was involved in a altercation, a brawl, if you will, in a Vegas hotel in December of last year. Apparently, all the police, the relevant authorities, have re-examined some of the evidence and whatnot, and have refiled charges against him. Some of which are pretty damning. Now, I don't know the truth of what happened. That's we're gonna have to wait and see what comes out, if anything. But you tend not to see this unless there's some significant evidence that goes along with it. So and again, some of what he's been charged with is more on the felonious side of things. Have to wait and see what happens, but you've got three fairly high-profile people in the MMA space this last week all dealing with pretty serious legal problems. Oh, I forget who I saw on Twitter make the joke, but the UFC is about to be sponsored by Duracell with all the battery charges. uh, oof. Yeah. So that's where we are at the moment. Again, I will try to keep people updated as more becomes available and whatnot. All right, there is no UFC event this coming Saturday, hence the lack of a preview. I think they're staying out of the way of WrestleMania, but they are back in 2 weeks for UFC 273. So that's why there's no preview. Let's check Twitter, see if anything crazy is broken, and if not, we will do plugs and get out of here. Nope. Some of my feed is kind of taken up by bits of the Oscars which are going on, and about which I could not possibly care less. Which I felt compelled to add just because it's going on, and I occasionally talk movies. Which is why, again, getting into plugs. So, I was busy last week. Let me go over this very briefly. Last Monday, I was part of a TV party alongside Mark over on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, along with Mark Radulich and Ronnie Adams. We talked about The Legend of Vox Machina, the animated adaptation of part of Campaign 1 of the web series Critical Role. It's a live-action D&D play campaign. So we talked that. Tuesday, I talked both Damn You Hollywood. I talked Turning Red and Cheaper by the Dozen, the terrible, terrible remake starring Zach Braff and Gabrielle Union. So if you want my thoughts on those movies, you can find them over there. Wednesday, I was part of a Metal Hammer of Doom, the review for Sabaton's latest release, The War to End All Wars, fixated on World War I and stories related to that. And Thursday was a TV party for Disenchantment, Part 4, the second half of the second season. Myself, Mark, and David Wright got together, and we talked about that. Pretty good discussion came out of that. We all mostly enjoy that show, so yeah, I was busy last week. This week, there'll be a Damn You Hollywood on Tuesday. That's another double shot, Deep Water and Windfall. Those are streaming on Hulu and Netflix, respectively. And I think that's my only other podcast. So I've also got my usual spate of professional wrestling coverage. AEW's Dark Elevation on Monday, MLW's stuff on Thursday, WWE SmackDown on Friday, and this Saturday at noon Eastern, I will be covering NXT Stand and Deliver, which is an event to try and lead into day one of WrestleMania in the evening. So there's that. Yeah, that is it. That's what I've got coming up this week. So, again, if you're interested in my other podcast, over on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, subgroup of the W2M Network, you can find a lot of my other stuff over there. No MMA this Saturday, so enjoy the week off. We will be back here next week to preview UFC 273. Boy, that's a big one, isn't it? You've got Volkanovski and Chan Sung Jung for the featherweight title, the rematch at bantamweight between Aljamain Sterling and Petr Yan. Gilbert Burns and Khamzat Chimaev. A pretty good middleweight fight on that card, actually, as well. Kelvin Gastelum and Nasruddin Imavov. That's a big fight for Imavov. So that's we'll have a full preview of that next week, and I am looking forward to it. So I hope you will be back here as well. Until next time, I thank you very, very much for your continued support and your patronage. Stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.